So you're all welcome to Positive Nights. Our guest tonight is a absolute gem of a person to have. Delighted to have Lee Harris here tonight. I have followed his work now for about 2 or 3 years. And my main intro to it was through the monthly energy updates. And I thought they were brilliant, particularly during the whole period that we went through when the lockdowns began. Really was helping people. And the feedback from a lot of my friends and people in my community was that this, I think it was yourself actually, Lee, and people like Laurie Ladd really kept people afloat, you know, gave them something to hold on to. So thank you for that. And I know that you do some amazing music as well, which I want to talk about later, which is kind of around frequency and stuff, 5 to 8 hertz. So I want to talk about that as well. And you've been in the whole kind of holistic spiritual world, I mean, for such a long time. You said there 90, what did you say? 2006 was when you really kind of began.
Yeah, 2006 was my first public video on YouTube, and 2004 was when I began doing readings. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay. So we're going to explore as much as we can about Lee and his life and some of his amazing information that he receives from the Z's. So we're going to have a little channeling as well at the end of the event. And if you guys can ask your questions as well, we'll have about 20 minutes for you to type in some questions in the chat box. But before we start, I'm going to invite you all with Lee as well, just to kind of drop in to our heart centers and just connect to your heart center. Just allow yourself to kind of move from the realm of thoughts into the realm of feeling. So let go of anything going on in your head, let go of your day, and just tune into your heart energy and your body awareness. Just tune into that right now. And you can place your hand on your heart if that feels good. And take a couple of breaths now into your heart center. On the out breath, really feel your body relaxing. And centering. And as you sit in this place now, this heart energy, just get a sense of that this is the kind of new language emerging, this language of feeling. That instead of going into judgment, going into divisiveness, that this is the place that you center from now, and you feel what feels right. You move towards it if it feels right, and you move the other direction if it doesn't resonate. So it's just this kind of awareness that allows you to move through life from this place without resistance. No need for resistance, no need for judgment. Just the feeling I get is kind of sovereignty and just that heart-centered awareness. And just before we open our eyes and begin, I invite you to stay in that place for this evening and as often as you want, but to drop in there tonight and stay in that place if you can. And as you open your eyes, you're all very welcome. And we're delighted to have Lee Harris. Isn't it brilliant? You're so welcome, Lee. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's lovely to be here with you.
It's brilliant. You're quite a legend here in Ireland, you know.
Really?
People love you here. You've got a real resonance here. Yeah.
Well, I love the Irish, and I was just telling you I haven't been here I haven't been there for such a long time. I'm really overdue, but the spirit of the people and the land it's yeah, I mean it's a cliche, but it's true. It's magical.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you're very welcome. Next time you come, we'll all hang out with you, definitely.
Thank you.
So I want to start so I don't know a lot about your background. You kind of appeared in my life through YouTube and stuff like that, and probably through a lot of people's lives. So I'd like to track back to England and where it all began and how it began for you. Were you always the kind of guy who was big into kind of metaphysical stuff, or were you a normal chap just surfing through life and something kind of happened in your life? I know you had a kind of a session where you actually had a channeling come in, if I remember correctly from what I've read. But yeah, were you an ordinary guy? Were you just rocking through life, or what type of man were you back in the day?
Well, I think like a lot of people I know who are spiritual or sensitive or awake, I was probably a normal weird guy. Kind of didn't feel uh, something felt off to me as a kid, and I couldn't put my finger on it. And because I had no understanding of what that was, I just turned it into, self-blame. Oh, I'm too emotional, or I feel too much, or, there was no one saying, oh, you might be a highly sensitive person, and that's what this can look like. And um, but the one refuge for me was creativity. So from a very young age, I was wired to be anything to do with creativity or communication were of high interest to me, which is interesting, isn't it? Because I often think that the seeds of what we can end up doing in our life show up in childhood, the things that we naturally love and naturally gravitate towards. So now, of course, my life is all about communication, creativity, healing. Um, but I went to healing and metaphysics around the age of 16. I had managed to develop a pretty big eating disorder from the age of about 10, so quite young. I was taken to Weight Watchers age 10. So I guess it must have started more like 8.5 or 9. And then I was in and out of diet clinics and constantly dealing with the kind of addiction I had with sugary foods, which I now realize was just covering up all of the things that I was feeling about myself, that I was intuitive, that I wasn't heterosexual, and all of these things were going to be a problem in my life because there was nowhere that I was seeing any of that normalized. So around the age of 15, 16, I just really dove into healing, and I started finding books. And I don't know who set me on that path, really. I credit Oprah Winfrey and her show as being like a light bulb for me. This was back when she wasn't doing Super Soul Sunday, but she would just have her audience talking about things that they were struggling with in life. And I know it's a little different in Ireland, but in England, I think one of the things Ireland and England do have in similarity is there can be a kind of stiff upper lip. We don't talk about the difficult stuff, especially when I was a kid, because I'm 45. So it's changing now. But so I was desperate to hear people talking about things that were real and that I was feeling and sensing and perceiving. So I think from the Oprah show, I kind of went into all the books, all the kind of, the classic books like Celestine Prophecy. And then my big Bible at that time was The Four Agreements, which had just come out and was not at all popular like it is now. But I just read that book and just felt the truth of it and the purity of it. And then, as you said, I was taken to see a channeler age 20. I was 21. And I was skeptical. I went to see this guy. He was lovely. Him and his wife were really nice. They had a very successful business. So he did one reading a week for free because he didn't need to earn money from it. And he saw it as his way of giving back. So I thought, wow, what nice people. And we sat down and he closed his eyes and he started channeling, and everything he said to me was amazing. But I remember leaving and going, why couldn't he have just told me that? Why did he have to close his eyes and put on a funny voice and pretend he was channeling? That was my perception. And then about a year later, it happened to me. So that was one of many lessons I've had in my life where, your mind, your judgment, your ego gets an opportunity to open up and be a little bit humbled.
That's the conditioned mind. Yeah, he just loves to comment on everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Lee, when we talk about the The Z's, yeah, the Z's. So these
Yeah.
are the beings that you work with and you channel. And they are 88 beings, is that correct? Is that what I'm getting? Yeah. And the first one that came through was Zachary. That was the first name that you heard. Um, if you go back to then when you first had that experience and you compare it to now, has the coherence and the quality of the information changed dramatically since then?
You know what, the weirdest thing, and this is why it took me a long time to believe that it had happened to me. It was so easy then, and it's so easy now. So the coherence was from day one just there. And if I gave my attention, because it's sort of, I experienced them on my left, the left side of my body, just above. If I'm talking to them in a internal conversation, or if I'm typing their words or writing their words, I hear them here. If I'm letting them speak through me, which I'll do at the end of today, it for about the first minute, or no, less than that, it's more like the first 20, 30 seconds, I might be repeating the sentences that I feel just above my head. And then there comes a point when there's no longer an awareness point above my head. It's just kind of coming through. I could stop it and I'm not unconscious. It's a little bit like I sit behind and I get to hear everything, but 95% of what I channel, I forget within 20 minutes of it coming through, because there's normally a lot of information, and some of it, some of it I've never heard before. So the coherence has always been there, but definitely the levels of information have grown as I have grown, as the world has changed. And I do think with any channeler, this is my personal belief and perception, I think that there's a limit to how much any of us can access, depending on our own personal human limits, or depending on what we're not supposed to know. I remember once there was a whole conversation I was having with a friend who was also in the spiritual field. And she was asking questions of the Z's, and they basically said, we can't talk about that because that will take Lee completely off his path and the role that he is here to serve. And if we talk about that now, it's just not his time, which was interesting because she was asking the question. And then 2 or 3 years later, that information got given to me. And they said, if we'd given it you 2 or 3 years ago, would have freaked you out and you wouldn't have been ready. And so I think there's always a relationship for the human who is the channeler with the being or beings that they're channeling, that there will always be information you don't know. There will always be information that's new to me or news to me. But there also has to be some level of correlation between who you're supposed to be as a channeler for the people you're channeling for. So there'll be some who will be deeply scientific. And often you look into that and those human beings have some understanding of science, enough that they can be the vessel for that communication. So I often think with me, it's not that they don't give information that is, I wouldn't say they give scientific information. They do give sometimes quite intense, energetic information about the world, but they tend to be a little more aligned with how we're feeling and what we're experiencing as we go through it. And they hold a certain space for that. And they say that they use my level of empathy and sensory ability when I'm channeling for a person or for a group to monitor what's the right volume level for this. Because at the end of the day, they only want to give information that we can alchemize, that we can use to help us, to transform us. They're not going to be, as you meet some channelers, intuitives, psychics, they're a bit less, they have a bit less bedside manner. They'll whack you over the head with something massive and then leave you to digest it. And they'll go, well, if you can't process it, it's your ego.
Yeah.
And I always used to run from those people very fast. So I do think there is some correlation between who you are as a person and your channeling. Yeah.
Sure. And when we get, I just want to go right up to date. So we have your August energy update, which I just listened to there a couple of days ago. And you speak about, it's obvious, but there's a lot of divisiveness on the planet right now. And there's a lot of disagreements. I mean, right down to even family members, having very different views on what's happening in the world. And you spoke to your, I suppose, your audience and your community about how to hold your center at this time and how to stay out of that. And I just wanted you to touch a bit more on that, if you would, because I think that's very relevant at the moment. I mean, I find it myself that some days I'm really good at it and other days I'm slipping, you know. So can you talk a little bit about that?
And I think that's true for all of us, Paul. You know, I think, we're human. And even if even if I'm sure many people who are tuned in for this are like myself, you kind of feel like you have a foot in two different worlds. And sometimes you're more in the human world and sometimes you're more in the world of energy and dimension. Couple of things. One of the things that came through in a channeling a few weeks ago is they said that you are essentially, and this helped me when I understood this. They said you're living in a time of energetic war. They said there is basically a war taking place, and it is more energetic in nature than the traditional wars that we may have seen before, even though, of course, there are places right now on Earth who are wrapped in a war, and that's its own kind of heartbreaking. But they said there is a war between dark and light right now. And that they talk about, they say in the world of energy, as above, so below, they say in much the same way that 95% of humans want connection, togetherness, benevolence, there's a small percentage who, either because of their wounds or their wiring, are here to disrupt and are here to, if you like, work for lower vibrations or lower agendas. So they're either living more in fear or they're trying to get everyone else to live in fear. Because when we go into fear, we lose our senses, we lose our human power. It might be that our instinct told us to be afraid of something. So I know that our senses sometimes lead us to feel a healthy fear that you might need to, but what we're seeing right now with the division energy is it's all being seeded through fear. And my guides have said that, one of the things that is currently being energetically attempted on the planet is division. And they say once you divide people, you can basically take over, if you like. So I say that not to get too scary, because they're saying this is playing out on dimensions that we can't even see, but it's affecting everything that we're experiencing right now. But coupled with that, we have a little bit of an amnesia problem going on right now. So I think for many years, those of us who studied spirituality or, awakening, we were like, oh, wouldn't it be great if more people woke up? That would be really great. I think now we're at a point where it's imperative. And even though I am seeing some people who are much more seduced by the fear story and told what to think because of the fear story, and then perhaps taking that out on other people in their life because they have completely hook, line, and sinker bought into the one story. Even though I'm seeing that, I'm also seeing more people going, hang on a second, what's going on over here? What do you mean? There is this slow awakening where more people are beginning to question what they're seeing taking place, and we actually need that. So I always say, wherever you can, without being combative or trying to change someone's mind about their truth, be honest about what you're noticing, feeling, or seeing, or perhaps the questions that you have about what you're seeing. It's often easier to talk to people about questions that you have about things that you're seeing rather than absolutes. Because if we just go back a couple of seconds to those people who are in the fear story, they are being asked to leave unity, leave multidimensionality, leave oneness. And what I mean by that is we need to be able to, in our world, respect how someone else is experiencing something, and vice versa, for them to be able to respect how you're experiencing something and to be able to go, oh, wow, it's completely different for me. This is what I'm experiencing. When you see the war division energy, it's when someone else wants to point the finger at you and tell you that you're the reason that all of this is going wrong, or and that simply can't be true. It can't be true in a multidimensional universe and on a planet where we are becoming more multidimensional and more aware of consciousness as a whole. It doesn't mean everyone is. it simply can't be true that we go to war with each other because of black or white, right or wrong. There has to be room for all of it. And so it's a very difficult time because it's causing a lot of pain, a lot of disruption, a lot of heartbreak, a lot of people losing friends or family that they didn't think they would. And what they say is things can repair. You can always repair. So don't go too deeply into the grief of what's happening now, but do recognize that there is an agenda at work to create that on the planet. And that's the thing that we have to wake up to, see, question. And they say that you can't be taken down or taken under provided you stay in your heart energy as a human being. And I have to be careful when I say things like that, because I know in the spiritual community, a lot of people can have the idea, well, I'm just supposed to be love and light to everybody. I don't believe that. There are certain people who it wouldn't be safe for you to be love and light to. There are certain people who don't necessarily deserve you sending a ton of love and light to them because of the way they're behaving towards you. But I do think we have to be able to come back to our heart and to be able to access it on any given day. So practices like meditation or anything that resets you or gets you back in your heart becomes really vital in a time like this when there are so many opportunities, incidents, or people trying to get you out of your heart.
Yeah, it's like being a samurai sometimes. You feel like you're training, you know, like your spiritual practice, your meditation, your breath work. Like I see everybody in this community now and they're up in their game, you know, they're spending like an hour or 2 hours before they leave the house every day and they're getting tuned up, you know, and that's a good thing. That's a really good thing. And you also really obviously see now people who are on a similar frequency to you. You really feel it. I've always felt it in the past in spiritual communities and different things, but I feel it way more stronger now, you know, and I see it in unusual places as well. It's not where you expect it sometimes. You know, it's not in the classic places we would expect. Um, but it leads me now, I want to stay on the subject of the kind of, I suppose, the galactic influence on the planet right now, where we tend to get bogged down in the physical and look at that. But I have heard you say in one of your messages that there is an energetic kind of a thing going on. There is an agenda going on. Do you feel with all that we've had a ton of UFO sightings in the last while and loads of information, even coming out of the Pentagon recently about there was one they actually showed a film of. I don't know if you think it was the Tic Tac it was called. And
I didn't
so just
see that one.
yeah, just a lot of UFO stuff really coming even into the mainstream. So what do you feel around that, and what do your guides tell you around that galactically, what's going on?
Well, a couple of different things. So in much the same way that they say that the agenda that they're talking about, or the agendas, I should say, because they say there are multiple agendas at work on the planet. They say that they've always been here. So it can be a little alarming or scary for someone who is just waking up to that now. And they'll look at something that's being done either in a country or by a government or across the globe and go, hang on a second, this doesn't look very humanistic. This doesn't look very benevolent. This looks different to that. They say it's always been here, but we're now at a point where the levels of consciousness on the planet are rising so much that it's visible. And we're beginning to see it as a world. And they actually say, we need to see this. We need this period of time because it requires a certain revolutionary energy inside the human. And that can look like a gathering of people. But equally, I would argue that what you just said about the ninja work that so many are doing right now, that's its own kind of revolution. Because you might feel that you're doing that to take care of yourself and to hold your own frequency. But what you're also doing is you're leaving your house and your energy field is transmitting all of the time. So the easiest example I can give for this is, you know, you go into a party and there are two very different people in that party that you see immediately. You see the one that you wouldn't mess with and you wouldn't want to be their enemy. And then you see the one who looks really warm and friendly. And sure, we could boil it down to the way they're holding themselves as to how we interpret that. So maybe the one that you wouldn't mess with is kind of looking at everyone like this. And they look slightly edgy, slightly unpredictable. They look angry. So, you know, the teeth are this. And then the happy, warm one just looks really at peace and is just really like, hi, just emanating. Sure, we can look at their physical tics, but actually their energy is what's showing us and what we're feeling. And it's having an effect on us that we're then making a decision. Oh, I would walk towards that person. I wouldn't walk towards this person. So raising your frequency the way that you're talking about it is going to be incredibly helpful to others in the world as well. And sometimes it can make some people want to interfere with you a bit more because they don't like the frequency, and so they want to poke at you with words or with, but actually what's interesting is the more you practice it and the more you live in that place, you become a bit more invisible to that more low level drama or conflict energy. And we're human, so it doesn't mean we might not find ourselves in a moment of that from time to time for a learning. But in general, when you talk about dimensions, the more you start to tap into your own frequency at a higher dimension or a higher level or a higher step on the ladder, that kind of conflict drama energy finds you a lot less because you're almost invisible to it. So regarding the the UFO stuff, and I, like many, I'm sure, have been hearing about this, reading about this for a couple of decades. So one thing that these guys say is they say, well, we've been here for a long, long time, because they describe themselves as travelers. So they say some of us have been incarnate on Earth, some of us have been on other planets, some of us have never been incarnate. But they say you're all much more malleable than you realize as souls, and you've been told a very human story about your origins, but you are actually all cosmic. And doesn't mean you've all been incarnate on other planets, because some of us are newer souls and we haven't had as many incarnations. But they say one of the biggest illusions that we've been operating under is the idea that we are a separate Earth. And so this period in history, I think there's a few different things to just be mindful of. How are we learning about contact from other worlds or other races? Why are we learning it right now? In what context is it being presented to us? It's very important to be discerning about, are we learning this because someone has decided it's time for us to know, or are we learning this because it's being used to make us feel or think a certain way, which is part of the game on Earth, part of the human 3D world that we're in right now. Is we have to develop a finer level of discernment and feeling, which is why our intuition is so important, because we know when we're being told something that's true, and when we're being told something that's half true, but there's something else in there that we can't quite put our finger on. So I think that's as important to consider when you're looking at disclosure. How is it coming out? Why is it coming out? In what context are we being asked to look at it? And do I believe that context? Or does that context have its own agenda? As much as, they're here and they've been here for a very long time.
Yeah, it's very true about the intuition right now. I feel it myself. The discernment we have is really developing. It's really you can really feel it. You can really feel when something is not right. And I think a lot of people are getting that right now. I want to move into, Lee, a little bit about emotions, how we deal with our emotions, and how. So we spoke about Ireland and England being kind of similar in that we would repress stuff over the years, and so even now, when you've done a lot of work on yourself and you're walking around, you get a tricky emotion or you get some trigger or sadness, and you say to yourself, I'm not really in the mood of this right now. You know what I mean? I'm doing something here. I'm going somewhere. I'm going to meet people. But the way I see it now is, when that's knocking on the door, I got to give space for that. I got to really kind of almost welcome that and be with that uncomfortable emotion, and you talk about this in your own work. I've heard you say this before. So can you talk to us a little bit about how that's really, how humans can better hold those kind of tricky emotions, and how do we complete them? How do we, is the goal to integrate them, or is it just to allow them to be there? And sometimes when we have those emotions, we are looking for them to go. So do we need to let go of the need for them to go as well? Can you
Yeah.
talk a bit about that process, you know?
Oh God. I mean, I remember, so this is going back, what, all 25 years, but I remember when I first started exploring spirituality and metaphysics. In fact, it was probably longer than 25 years ago. I think me, like many people, was like, great, we'll just be in constant bliss. We'll get rid of all these, I think that was also a belief that wasn't necessarily challenged that much back then. I think we knew less as a society about trauma, and we were speaking about trauma less. So now I feel like there are more and more people speaking about trauma in our bodies. And this can be everything from the incident when you were screamed at by an angry parent or guardian when you were 5 years old and you were completely open and you were doing something you thought was loving and you got screamed at. Your body remembers that. The body keeps the score, as they say. So you can have a trauma then in you for all of that time until you're able to uncover it. And it doesn't always mean you have to go back to age 5, but it often means we'll replay that incident through relationships. So I think for many of us, often our earliest romantic relationships are us looking to heal parts of our childhood or wounds with our parents. And then you get to a certain point where that's no longer, you're not doing it on such a foundational level, but there might still be refining moments that come up. So I guess for me, what I know to be true about emotions is that they shouldn't last very long. So if I'm angry, and I really allow my anger to be in my body and let me feel my anger, even if I don't know why it's come, or part of me wants to think I shouldn't be angry. That's not very love and light, whatever my judgment is on that feeling. If I can just let it be in my body, I can't remember what science has said about this. I want to say they say it's something like it would last 45 seconds or maybe it's less. And so that's always a good barometer for me. I know I haven't processed an emotion. If I'm holding on to some resentment, judgment, I can't let go of something that's looping around my head. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I clearly either wasn't capable or aware that at the time that incident catalyzed in me of allowing my emotions to be felt. So sometimes I'll have to go through something for a couple of weeks and then go, oh, I felt disrespected by that person in that moment, and it triggered something in me. And now I've worked out why I'm feeling a bit resistant toward them. So sometimes it can be this life, and other times it can be other lives. That's the weirdest thing about it. You can't always find the rational reason why you're feeling a certain way, but you can start to notice, oh, I get triggered around grief. And when I'm around the grief of other people, I withdraw, I break out into a cold sweat. And that can mean a couple of things. It can either mean that grief was a traumatic experience for you in your earlier life, and you haven't really got in touch with that, or this could be a past life thing for you, that you've been around a lot of grief before and you just don't want to be there. So one of the things that's happening right now, and this relates back to us talking about discernment and intuition on the rise and our need to really own more of that, we are having to very fast heal a lot of our human stuff. And it's no longer just you as Paul or me as Lee, it's now ancestral. So if you look at what the Me Too movement and Black Lives Matter and how they have had a much bigger focus in our collective consciousness in the last few years, that's evidence of a collective ancestral healing that is trying to take place, that is happening a bit more through conversation, through awareness. As a group, we're beginning to include some of these wounds that are in full play on our planet and have seen many people suffer because of them. You can look at those and then you can take it back to yourself and you can go, oh, interesting. I'm letting go of a lot of stuff fast here, which means on certain days, I've just got a lot of emotions moving through me. For me, it was very liberating when I finally got to the point where instead of trying to organize the emotion, get rid of the emotion, clean the emotion, I was just like, oh, I'm emotional right now. And I'm not even going to try and let my mind get involved because my mind will sustain it. My mind will tell me an extra story about it that I'll then think about next week. So I think just giving yourself room for your emotions and recognizing when your emotions do not want you to go and be with a certain group of people or go and do a certain thing you've committed to, and giving yourself permission in those moments to change your plans. And it's not that you end up changing all your plans forever, but there's usually a period that most of us who've learned to suppress ourselves or people please go through, where we have to start going, oh, hang on, no, this doesn't quite feel right to me, and now I'm going to have to change my plans. And then if you do that for a period of time, you start to get a quicker response in your body of how you actually feel about something when someone invites you to somewhere. And you're better at saying, I'm not sure, can I get back to you, rather than a yes that you then regret and have to backtrack and undo. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So when you spoke about like ancestral stuff there, that's definitely come up for me recently, is going on in the collective right now, and it's actually going back through your ancestral line and through past life kind of stuff, you know. Like that feels like a lot to take on, you know, because the world is so tricky at the moment itself, that when you get that stuff going on as well. But I think there's a kind of it's all part of what we are becoming. And that's one of your latest videos, which I thought was really, really cool. Who are we becoming? You know, so is that what we're becoming? Are we becoming this kind of multi-dimensional being that can tap into where it's been before, lifetimes ago, and let go of stuff kind of in the moment? You know, are we kind of really stepping up to that game, do you feel? What are, you know, when you talk about who are we becoming, yeah, maybe speak to that a bit for us, Lee.
Yeah, and that, so I do a 90-minute teaching every month in my portal members community, and if I'm not mistaken, that Who Are We Becoming video is a 15-minute or 20-minute extract from one of those. The best way I could put it, my understanding of it at this point, is if you think back to, so Paul or anyone here on the call, just take a moment to think back to yourself in August 2016. Now, that might be hard for you. You might not remember that month, but try and pick something that was going on in your life in 2016, so 5 years ago, and just try and remember how your life looked and how you felt about it. And see if you can see a difference between who you were then and who you are now. So what I can best tell you is that 5-year gap that most of us have been through, and I'm sure some of you, you know, there might be a couple of you going, well, I don't feel that different. You're probably ready for a kind of rocket ship launch in your life in that case, with the way the energies are. But for most of us, we'll remember things that we were conscious about in different ways, or unconscious about, or how we felt about our life, or where we were in our life. Now imagine the next 18 months is the same passage of time. That's what I can tell you from these guys about the speed of the changes that we're in. And you made a really good point, Paul, where you said how, you know, the world being what it is. I mean, just what's been going on in Afghanistan this last week, just, you know, you see it, you read about it, you make contact with it energetically, and there's so much about it that just is, for someone like us who isn't living in that kind of thing right now, you can't even begin to get your head or your heart around it. But you know it's deeply impactful and deeply traumatic to feel what's going on over there right now. So part of why we're going through these collective clearings is we are beginning to look across the planet and see, wherever you look, there's something going on everywhere across the globe. And so sometimes we're looking outside ourselves and having a reaction or a relationship to what's outside. And then on certain days, it finds us and it moves through the center of our body and it clears out what we need to clear out in relationship to what is actually the most multidimensional conscious time I've ever seen on Earth. And that's a really weird thing for me to say when you look at some of the horrors that we're seeing, that you think, well, that does not look very high consciousness or high frequency. But in fact, where we're at as a society now, and I really understand when they say this, the consciousness is higher than ever before, which also means that the lower vibrations are more visible, more surfaced, and more in fight with you than ever before. But we also have a way of seeing and knowing about the world that we wouldn't have known before. I said to Stephen, with the Afghanistan stuff, I went, God, 80 years ago, we wouldn't have known about what was going on over there. We would barely have had a sense of it, even if a news story came along. So we're very plugged in to the world in a multidimensional way. And that ancestral healing that's moving through us is basically us shedding and purging as much as we can to keep up with the speed of transformation now. And some people listening, watching, you'll have done bigger purges in years past. I know for me, I did a lot for many, many years. And in the last 2 years, I've felt like I'm definitely healing and things are changing, but it's not the same as it was for me many years ago, where I was going through massive wallops of change. So I'll also say that you don't tend to live like that forever. There are periods or years in your life where you'll go through very intense transformations, and it might seem like it's in the way of what you want to do in the world. But the truth is, you're going through all this inner stuff so that you can clear some levels of your old self out to create new aspects and new elements of your outer life from a different, clearer place. So I know full well the frustration that can happen when you feel like your healing is in the way of your living. But in fact, the two are always in tandem.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lee. That was really insightful. Thank you so much. Just to say to people, feel free to type in your questions, because I'll go over to you guys in a second for the Q&A. So just type them in the chat box, and we'll get Lee to answer some of your questions. Anything that's come up in the chat or anything you want to ask Lee yourself, feel free to go ahead. Lee, I've interviewed a lot of people, and you have as well. I think between us, we've interviewed the whole spiritual community. It's been an amazing trip, right? You speak to these people and you just get so, like, it's like getting a course in enlightenment. You're like, I've chatted to Eckhart Tolle. I don't know if you have, but I've chatted to so many
with
people.
Eckhart. No, a mutual friend, but no, I haven't met him or spoken to him yet, but I think he's wonderful.
You just feel like you're getting golden information. You're just sitting in it's incredible. And I just wanted to ask you, out of all the people you've interviewed, and people ask me this question too, what can you give us a few of the things where you went, wow, that's breathtaking information I've just received here? Is there anything that really sticks out for you from certain people over the last year that really, really caught your eye?
Well, firstly, I'll tell you why I did my show. So I have a show called Impact the World that comes out every Monday. And having, been a student of this field for almost 30 years, and then worked in it for almost 20 now, my goal was, I recognize how many people are coming online to do their thing and do their work in the world. So in the last 4 or 5 years, I've really enjoyed offering trainings or workshops for those people to enter the spiritual field. Like Paul, before we started, we both said, isn't it interesting? Neither of us thought we would ever do this as a job. It was a passion and a hobby, but we didn't realize we'd work here. So my goal with Impact the World was to get under the hood with those people about their journey. I didn't necessarily want to interview people who were just going to be teaching. I wanted to understand what had made them tick as a human. What had they had to overcome to do their work? So actually, I'm not recalling any piece of information that anybody has said that has kind of wowed me, but the ones I remember are the conversations where I felt like the person had no filter with me or the audience. We had a really open exchange where something happened that was bigger than the person or me or the show. Just something opened up. I mean, so many people that we've had have been brilliant, but the ones that have surprised me and pleased me the most are the ones who have been who've really shown up with no filter, no guard. They'll just have a conversation, and we can go to places that they perhaps don't normally get to talk about. So that's kind of been my bigger what's made my heart happier, perhaps.
Yeah, you're kind of talking about authenticity there and just that free opening space, and I know exactly what you mean. Somebody like Laurie Ladd, for example, I think you interviewed Laurie, did you? I found that with
It was
her, she was
great.
just willing to go. Yeah, it's just like chatting to an old friend, you know.
Yeah, and
It's
and I'd say most, you know, a lot of the people I've interviewed, but then it's all, people surprise you too. You know, there are some people you think will be a certain way, and they're not. They're completely, so you never quite know what you're going to get. So it's been a fun ride for sure. But
yeah,
yeah, some great people.
yeah, it's brilliant. It's a brilliant thing to do, you know. It's like you're blessed to do this, really, you know. A little bit on the subject of empaths. I saw that you interviewed Anita recently, Anita Morjani, and so did I. And I loved her when she recounted her near-death experience. I just had to get a hold of her, you know, a few years ago. And then I saw the empath information. And I think a lot of people definitely have this kind of energy going on, the empathic energy in their bodies, and they feel very sensitive and very disturbed sometimes. And just, I suppose, yeah, what do you feel you're an empath yourself? And have you got any kind of tips or advice you can give to people who feel very, very sensitive to the world?
Yeah, I do. It took me a long time to understand that about myself. The other thing that's tricky is uh, not every empath is the same. So I think we get into idea again, we go very linear and one-dimensional with it, which is how we've all been trained to think. But it's like, oh, well, an empath is going to feel this, this, and this, and behave this way and this way. And it's like, well, depends on the empath, depends on how much they've healed their original trauma, depends on how they were raised, depends on their wiring. So I experience myself as a bit of an energetic empath. So the energy and the emotions of people is what I'm tracking, but I'm also tracking the energy around. So I've met other people who are empaths who are much more or I would say their issue is more chronic in the emotional entanglement with others. You know, it shows up in people pleasing and all that kind of stuff. And I'm lucky that I never had it that chronically. But I definitely identify with a lot of the scale. And one of the things I loved with Anita, I was lucky enough to be having dinner with Anita about 3 years ago when she told me the title of the new book, Sensitive is the New Strong. And it was, I don't know, 18 months away from being published at that point. And my whole body got tingles. And I said to her, this is great. This is the new phase of your work. And this is really important because I think so often we look at sensitivity or sensitives as cursed, or they have to kind of figure out how to survive. Truth is, it's a superpower, but you have to be able to use that superpower. So I have friends in my life who have superpowers that I do not have. You know, someone who can put a car back together, or, you know, things that I'm like, wow, that's amazing. But if you are an empath or an energetic, someone who is wired in that way, your superpower is going to be assisting and helping with the energy and the emotions of the world and of others. And you will find the right way to do that. Some people will be an extrovert healer. Other people will be an introvert writer. It doesn't have to look the same for everybody, but that level of connection to feeling is really important, because we're still really, when it comes to our consciousness as humans around that, we're still babies when it comes to understanding the inclusion of our feelings and the acknowledgement of our feelings and the expression around our feelings, and how important that is. Because the better we get at that, the less we are going to want to fight each other, because we'll be looking at our triggers rather than taking our trigger and turning it into an arrow and walloping someone else in the back with it, you know?
We have a question here, Lee, from Laura. So Laura is asking, what's the best way to talk to a person who is not awake?
Well, I guess it depends what you mean by awake, Laura, because I know there are many different, some people think awake means spiritually awake. Some people think awake means awake to all the stuff going on the planet. So I think for me, it depends on what you're trying to say. Are you wanting to have a conversation with them about those topics? In which case I would share my own experience. I'd say, oh, well, I've been having this really interesting week where I've been looking at this and this and this. And then I'd gauge their response. And by making it my own experience, I'm not putting them on the spot or making them uncomfortable. I'm inviting them, if they want, to ask me questions, and then it can go back to them. But I guess I would proceed carefully. But I also feel like, most people have the same desire deep down, even if it's been covered over by stuff that's happened to us in our life. We want to connect, we want to feel loved, we want to be able to love, we want to feel safe with other people. So I always think if you can get into the heart with anyone, you're in good shape. So, I've learned with certain people, I'm not going to talk to them about politics, and I'm not going to talk to them about whether or not spirituality is real, because we're going to hit blocks. But I will talk to them about the area of their life that they're passionate about, that they light up around, because suddenly heart energy is there. So for me, it's a little bit less about people's beliefs and a little bit more about how people show up in their feelings and their way of being. Some of the loveliest people I've been around are super warm and friendly and like looking out for their community. They don't believe in intuition because they don't experience it. So they just don't believe it. But they're very generous in their community. And equally, I've met many people who believe themselves to be very knowledgeable about awakening and behave in appalling ways. You're like, how can you have read all these books and then think it's okay to be really rude to that person for no reason, just because you could? It doesn't. So I think for me, I'm always more interested in how people are showing up from here than from here.
Okay, really, that's a good question. Thank you, Laura, for that, and thank you, Lee. Okay, so this is kind of these. There's two questions here quite similar. Angela is asking, is it possible that this energetic purge and empowerment is coming through the body? She's getting very strong, sharp body discomfort, which comes and goes fairly quickly. And then Gavin has a similar question where he's getting extreme back pain, headaches, and terrible fatigue. And what can be done to kind of alleviate the intensity of these physical experiences?
I'm sorry to hear that, and I know a lot of people who somatize in that way. So things will hit the body, and they will. Some people I know the body will be their barometer for telling them that they're trying to process something energetically. And I think you have to be a little careful with the body, because there are times when it's very correct to go and get things checked out, just in case, for peace of mind, or just in case there is a problem with your body that is going to need help or assistance beyond what you can do. But the other thing I wonder about, when you're having unexpected aches and pains like that, and especially if they're newer and you have eliminated diagnosable diseases in the body, then it's always good to look at, well, what in my environment, my outer environment, is causing dis-ease in my inner environment. Sometimes we, get to our 40s and we're a bit more willing to deal with some of the trauma that we had in our childhood. So we'll manifest something physical to help us get to the bottom of it. But other times it can really be environmental pollutants or toxins. I have several friends who have extreme reactions to Wi-Fi and things like that, and touch wood. I know more people who at this point don't. But it might be worth you looking at what in my outer environment has changed recently. Am I more stressed? Have I got more toxic relationships going on in my life? Do I not feel I've got a place where I can, even if it's just for 20 minutes a day, feel a sense of purpose or peace about being alive? So look at that, but then also look at your physical environment and look at your diet too, because the body can be various things. And I think especially in these times, sometimes it can be energetic purges, but it can also be that you might be having a bigger response to some of the pollutants and toxins that we're all dealing with right now. And so I just want to include that as a possibility for you to look at too. But generally, when our body is shutting down in that way, and our chi is, our energy is beginning to go inward, something is trying to get our attention, whether it is a physical disease or whether it is something manifesting in our outside world that isn't allowing us to be flowing in our life. So it might be worth just making a checklist of a bunch of things and see what's changed. And good luck.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Gavin and Angela. So Gillian is saying that she's a super sensitive, empathic person. And at times the energy that clears through her, especially through the night, leaves her feeling exhausted. No matter how much she surrounds herself in love and light, it's still happening. I feel she feels everybody's issues, and it's so hard for her to be around people. How can she be helped in this? Can you help her in some way, advise her in some way?
Yeah, a couple of things. So I know there are several people, including Anita, and I mean, there are many, many more people out there now who really have devoted their life's work to this and have really studied this area in depth. So I would encourage finding some of the best in the field around that kind of boundary work. A few things I know about boundaries, and I did private sessions for 15 years. And I worked a lot with certain people who would have boundary issues with energy at night or with beings, and they were having the same boundary issues showing up in the day. They either had childhoods where there were no boundaries, or their boundaries were constantly breached. And so now they hermit themselves away from people because they've lost trust and they haven't been able to build a new relationship in themselves with boundaries so that they feel safe to see people. But equally, there are those people who, if you're wired very sensitively like you are, there can be a balance point missing for you in your own body. I'll give you a very quick example. And this is a small example, but it's something that worked for me, and it's something I still do to this day. There were times in my life where if I walked through a room and I looked at people, I too much information. So I learned to give eye contact through choice. And I learned what times in my life I should not be looking at people. And that was a small adjustment that worked for me. So if I'm focused on something and I know I need to stay focused on it, I can't just be open to what's going on in the room. You know, I'm doing something for my job or coming to do this. I will draw in my focus to a certain degree, and not giving eye contact randomly to lots of people that I'm walking past. I'll find a way to kind of come back into my own body. And I think one of the things that can happen for people like yourself who are very wide open is you have to learn a new relationship with your body again. And sometimes the trauma is in the body from childhood. So we tend to stay out of it, or we pay attention to other people as a way of existing in the world, when actually we can exist in ourselves and have a relationship to all of them. And the balance point is where we get to go between the two. So for you, it might be investigating at what point do I leave my body and why? And do I become so immersed in everything else outside and around me? But I, again, as when I first started answering this question, it's a great question. I would really, if I were in your shoes, I would devote myself to studying the books, the videos, the workshops of teachers who are out there really talking about this. Because if you expose yourself to 3 or 4 of those teachers, you'll find a few different things that will work for you, and you'll be able to concoct your own formula, which is the same thing I did.
Yeah, and I would highly recommend that book, actually, Gillian, the book by Anita Moorjani. I have a copy, actually. If you want one, I can send it over to you. So
and it's great.
I know it's a great book. Yeah. So Nellie is asking, any thoughts how to best minimize the divide while still honoring our truth and values?
And do you mean that, I'm guessing, the division energy with people?
Yeah, what we spoke about earlier, how
Yeah.
best to do that and still honor, her own truth and values.
Yeah, I think for me there is one non-negotiable around this, and I'm not willing to be attacked by anybody for having a different belief to them. And if they do attack me, if they are aggressive with their viewpoint, or if they are willingly disrespecting my own, then I'll tell them that's what just happened, and I'll warn them. I'll say, if this happens again, we aren't going to be able to be around each other. And it's that simple. You have to have a non-negotiable around respect if you yourself are mostly operating in a respectful way with other people. So that would be my first thing. And then the second thing is just having a few sentences that you feel really good about and very aligned with, such as, for me, it would be, if Paul and I were having a disagreement about something and it was getting heated, I would say, Paul, I respect your point of view is X and my point of view is Y, and it doesn't seem like we're going to meet in the middle, and I don't want to fight with you. So can we just change the subject? So I'm not trying to take him away from his stance, and I'm also not telling him I'm going to change mine, but I'm acknowledging the conflict energy between us, because that's the thing. Most people are unconscious when they're in conflict energy. And even when you're used to being conscious about your stuff, I can find myself, I can hit a few levels in myself, and it takes me maybe a minute or two to go, something's cranked up inside me, and then I step back and I kind of widen and look at it. But a lot of people don't even have that understanding. So acknowledging there is a fight in the room, without blaming the other person for the fight or telling them it's their fault or judging them in any way, just saying, I'm aware we're disagreeing, and it doesn't feel good to me to just disagree with you. So can we change the subject, or can we agree not to talk about this? Your sentences for you will be very much your language, what feels right for you. But those are the kinds of ways that I have navigated a few heated discussions that I've had with people. That a heated discussion to me is of no use unless it's transforming as it goes. So if it's just a heated discussion of you're right, I'm right, you're wrong, I'm not interested in playing that game. So you find your sentences, and I'm sure you will.
Yeah, good advice, Lee. Thank you. Ellie Otney has been listening to your song, your live recording of Angel, and I'm glad she brought up some of the music because I'd like to touch on some of that. So the live recording of Angel was sang on the 10th anniversary of 9/11. She listens to it often. Do you think this is a time to really find our tribe, as mine is getting smaller all the time? My world is getting smaller. Is this a good thing? Even the spiritual people I followed and respected are shocking me at this time. Okay, so yeah, that's the question, Lee.
Thank you. Yes, I think I can tell you from my position. So I'm 45, and I've definitely got a really nice little close tribe in my life. However, in just the last 11 years, there have been 2 or 3 times where my tribe has gone through a big change, and not necessarily through choice, just, I'm no longer on the same timeline as this person. So even though I can still love and respect them, and we're just no longer as in sync. And I do think that the grief and the loss that we feel when that happens has to be acknowledged. It has to be felt. But I think it's always so important when you're in those phases to go, okay, I'll create my next level people. Because whenever someone moves out of our life, what they actually leave is a space. And so, yeah, at first we often grieve that space is existing. What we forget is, well, that space can be filled if we want it to be. And maybe that one friend will become 2 or 3 different friends. So I do think you have to go through the process of letting that person and that relationship go, and it moves through you, but then you create this opening. So remember that you can create things for yourself. So if I were you, I would write down on a piece of paper something along these lines. And again, you can use your words, but I'm just giving you a guideline. I invite resonant, lovable, and enjoyable new friends into my life now. And that's it. And I'd stick that on the wall. And then maybe I'd see it a week later and I'd go, oh, I want to add a few more words. I don't just want them to be lovable and resonant. I want them to be joyous. And, so we can kind of cast into the future in that way. And it's very important for us to remember to do that. So I do see a lot of people changing. And, I think all of us have been a little bit shocked watching the spiritual community divide too, because it has very much started to fragment. But that to me is less about the spiritual community and more about the human community and just what we're experiencing on earth. So yeah, I send you love for the healing side, but I want to remind you that you can create something new and that you're creating a space for that now.
Yes, I think we should all get invites printed up and send them out. Resonant beings, I love it. I love it. I love when you said that. It's brilliant. I'm going to paraphrase this one. It's not really a question, but it's quite a statement here from this person. So he does body work as a sensorometer psychotherapist. His greatest learning recently was, hang on. So, yeah. His greatest learning recently was from a talk at a recently amazing recovery summit. It relates to the opposing forces of trauma and healing. So he brings in Newgrange as well to talk about the monument with the concentric circles. But his daughter had an experience where his daughter had a sexual assault. It brought forth a body memory of sexual abuse experience she had forgotten about from the age of 6. He said he was extremely angry. And his daughter came to him and said, love is the greatest healer of all. And he said he thought he was enlightened and realized now that she is a teacher and healer at the age of 18. This happened this week. That's quite a statement. That's quite a powerful, wow. Have you anything to share on that, Lee?
Well, firstly, I love it. And I just want to remind you that, when you say you thought you were enlightened, I think enlightenment is ever evolving states of being. And so I think it's always good to not necessarily claim we're enlightened, maybe, because then something will come along. But I just want to remind you that just as your daughter was your teacher this week, it might be you to her next week. And that's how it can move for all of us. No, I think that's very powerful. And I think it's a very concrete example of, Paul, you asked me about ancestral healing before we got started here. And one of the things that I think we're seeing in the world, and this was something the Z's said, they talked about some of the control that we're seeing coming in the world right now. And I know that's very triggering for many of us, depending on how you view it, what you see, what you don't. And they said that one of the things you have to remember is that anything that's happening right now is also taking you back through history. So it's taking you back to other times and your ancestral memories of this body that came through your family's lineage. And also as a soul who has been incarnated on earth before, what your soul remembers about other times on earth where we have been through these very difficult passages. So for example, what has been happening with, I'll say the C word, this last year and a half on the planet, will track back into ancestral times for many people around times of plague or times of other major events on the planet that related to disease. And I did know some people who I didn't know them very well, but I was struck by how alarmed they were by what was going on. And I'm not saying that it wasn't something to be mindful or aware or, have feelings about, but what I got with one of them, I was like, oh, wow, they've been through this before, like in a really big, bad way on earth. And maybe it didn't end well for them. And so they were very triggered about, oh, is this the end of the world because of this sea thing going around the planet? And I remember thinking, no, this isn't the end of the world. But how interesting that for them, it feels like the end of the world because of what they're going through as a healing from way before. So it's interesting how it works. Our life moves in circles and spirals, and we hit certain things. And when we are able and capable of dealing with it in our life, we'll remember something that we perhaps couldn't have remembered before because we didn't have the tools or the safety or the support that we needed to fully process it.
Great question. Thank you for that. And thank you, Lee. Sabine is asking, would you advise to do even more body work right now, like yoga, qigong, tai chi, to be able to harness our emotions and clear our mind? Or do you feel it's more important to stop and stay still even more in these crazy times? And what do you feel the Z's would recommend in this instance?
Well, I know what the Z's would recommend, and because I've been with them for so long now, I would recommend the same thing: investigate. If I were to sit here and say, well, yes, everyone should be doing more body work, that won't be true for a vast percentage of people who are tuning in on this. For some people, it will be stillness. So become a master of noticing your own frequency. There are certain things I know will shift my frequency, one of them being water. You know, if I get into a body of water, or even at a push, if that's all I have available, a shower, my whole energy field resets. That's not true for everybody. Some people don't want the water element isn't quite right for them. So I would say experiment and see how you feel after a bit more body work for a few days, and see if you feel better, and then see how you feel after being a bit more still. And the reason I'm putting it back to you is A, we're also unique and individual. B, we're all at different stages of our lives, of our development, of what's going on in our life. And C, we have to get good at testing and retesting and paying attention to how we're actually responding, rather than a rule that a book gave us at this time more than ever, because the balance point on Earth is shifting faster than ever before, which is why I'm, always called to talk about find what helps you balance, because it's something that we're having to, as you said, Paul, become more ninja-like with these days.
Thanks for that question. So, yeah, there's one one we hear a lot here, but it's good, I suppose, to go over it. What suggestions do you have for starting to connect with their guides and channeling? Any tips or suggestions you can give for people in that respect?
Yeah, well, I would love if we can. I mean, I know there's a certain time limit today, but if any of you have pen and paper handy right now, or if you're able to type on a computer screen, if you're watching this on computer, and if you can't, then do this exercise afterwards. I'd like you to write or type at the top of your sheet of paper, what does my soul want to tell me today? What does my soul want to tell me today? And then I'd like you to just write what comes through without thinking about it, without judging it, without trying to stop it. Just when you ask yourself that question, what does my soul want to tell me today? See what words you hear. Don't judge them, and just start writing them down until you're finished. We'll take about a minute to do this. So what does my soul want to tell me today? Okay, and we'll just draw to a close. If you're still writing, you can always come back and write more later. So first things first, if you didn't get anything, don't worry, but this is something you can try again. Part of it can sometimes just be the mental block around, well, I don't know. How do I speak to my soul? But this is an incredible exercise to, it's very simple and very quick and easy. The biggest block you will mostly have to this exercise is being willing to sit down and do it. But if you were to do this for 2 minutes every day, you would start to allow yourself to receive messages that are beyond your mind, that are outside your mind, that are bigger than you. And I always say, don't worry too much about getting in contact with your guide or with an angel, or try not to worry too much about how someone else you've seen out there is channeling, but just start with opening up a dialogue with your higher self and your soul. Because it's all in the same continuum. Like the Z's are part of my lineage. So the Z's are, in some ways, they're in relationship to my soul, and they're part of that line. But if I was starting now, and remember, I didn't want to meet my guides, I didn't even think it was possible. I would be doing this. I would be sitting down and doing a little bit of automatic writing for myself every day, and see if I can let the voice of my soul or my higher self speak to me. A lot of it with channeling is calibrating yourself to that energy. So the people that I've done this exercise in workshop rooms all over the world and with private clients. And I remember the one brilliant woman that I worked with. She was this incredible businesswoman, really phenomenal mind, but she was really struggling with her heart and her energy and becoming a little softer and a little more receptive. So I did a series of sessions with her, and I gave her this exercise to do every day. And she came back to me a week later and said, I said, oh, did it work? She went, oh, no, it didn't really work. And I went, oh, I'm sorry. Were you not able to write anything? She went, no, I wrote stuff. And I was like, okay, well, what were you writing? And she said, well, it was things like, you're very lovely and you're a very great person and da da da. It was just all this nice stuff. She said, but it wasn't like any useful information. And I went, okay. And I said, how often do you speak to yourself that way? And she went, well, no, I don't. And I was like, great. This is step one. You are calibrating to the frequency of love. That is how they have to train you at first. When I started channeling, I did not get the level of information I was getting now, but they were also working on me to get me used to being in a loving relationship, because the relationship I was in with my own mind was what we might call toxic. So, I was much more believing of the hard things that I thought about myself than ever praising myself. So when suddenly they came in and held space for the totality of me, it was a shift. So I think often people think that channeling is a hard thing to pull off. I don't think it's actually a hard thing to pull off. I think it's a hard thing to get used to, because really it's not making first contact that's the big deal. It's how you, your body, your emotions, your mind are willing to shift and change over the months of you dipping into that channeling energy, because it will change you. So I hope that helps. But this exercise is a really good, quick one to do.
Brilliant. Thanks for that. And I think we've kind of come to the end of our questions. So Lee, we have exactly the right amount of time. It all works out perfectly for you to do a little bit of channeling for us, which would be brilliant. Yeah. That'll take us up to 9 o'clock. Great.
That sounds great. So when I channel, my eyes are closed, so there isn't a lot to see. I always say, it can be good when you're listening to channeling if you're new to it, and I'm sure many of you aren't, but for those of you who might be, the one thing that they have explained about it is it kind of it opens you to your own intuitive frequencies. So it's quite normal for people to tell me after they've listened to a channeling, somewhat distressed, oh my God, I don't remember anything that was said. I went off into this world that's going on in my life. And I'm like, great, that's perfect. The frequency does more of the work than we realize. We often get worried about the words we think we're missing, but the channeling frequency opens you to that frequency in yourself, which is why I always think anyone who's drawn to channeling knows it. You either know it from the past, or some part of you recognizes it for yourself, or you want to make more contact with that energy. So yeah, so for those of you who are new to it, that's just a good way to approach it. And yeah, it'll probably take me 30 to 60 seconds to start talking. Good. Welcome. We are aware that while on the one hand, this is a worldwide conversation, we would like to acknowledge those of you who are gathered in Paul's country of origin right now for the work that you are doing in holding heart energy. You see, Ireland has a very strong heart energy that is connected to the intuitive. Every country has its own signature, and of course, the energy signature can change over the years, but the country known as Ireland is one that has long understood the connection between the heart and the intuitive, or what you might call the magical. So it is a very powerful place when it comes to that. And yes, like any country, it has its different shades in the community. There are those who are, of course, highly resistant to either of those aspects. But for those of you who find yourself not only there right now, but gravitating to Paul and his frequency that he is holding and where he is broadcasting from, that is what you are most intrigued by. And the intuitive heart is going to be more needed in your months and years to come. For what you will be able to see, sense, and feel in some of the fights you will see going on the planet between individuals that you know, or in a more global sense, is you will see the heart wound present. There has to be a heart wound present for a conflict to take place between human beings. Heart wounds have to be in the mix for conflict energy to be active. So what you are seeing on the planet right now is a great deal of stoking of wounds. So if you look at what is taking place on a broader stage across the world globally, you are seeing choices being made that are not necessarily for the good of all, nor are they coming from a benevolent place. We are not saying that all people are making those choices, but there are woven into the fabric of your society at this time certain limiting factors and what we would call limiting actions that are both being enacted on the planet and also are seeking to enact themselves on the planet. So for the heartfelt among you, this can be quite triggering. You start to witness the pain, the destruction, the closing in of the walls, and it doesn't make any sense to you, for you perhaps didn't see it coming or didn't quite think it would take place in this way. And this is where we speak to those of you who are intact with your intuitive hearts. It only takes a heart being seen and felt by another for a healing to begin. So this is why being combative with one another will never be the healing that any of you need. But for example, if you were to find yourself in a conflict with someone else and you ask yourself while you are in it, perhaps even if you are triggered about what they are accusing you of or seeing you as, to invite your heart to be present. You may first begin with, this is a very upsetting conversation, which I'm sorry for both of us about, for neither of us want to be upset. I'm sorry this is upsetting for you. This is upsetting for me too. Now, we are not saying that would be the correct sentence to use. It might be that you need to use other sentences, but understand what we are doing is we are acknowledging the heart pain in the conversation. And when you start to acknowledge the heart pain in a conversation in a way that does not make the combative individual feel judged or exposed or triggered, it can start to soften the charge. For the charge is not able to exist when the heart is open. The charge is not able to exist when the heart is open. It is coming instead from a defensive, protective, reactive, or aggressive place in the human being. So you may find yourself equally defensive and protecting yourself against this perceived attack, or perhaps you are the one who starts the attack and you don't even know why it came out of you. But what we will tell you is, the more you can open your heart frequency in these incidences, the more your heart can be allowed to see a bigger truth of why this person is so triggered or defended. And perhaps you do not know their underlying why, but it is enough to see that there is upset in the room. Not just attack or villainy, as some of you might want to see it. There is upset driving this. And right now, there is a great deal of confusion, upset, and chaos on your planet, which in some ways is being elevated and shifted via the rising consciousness, but in other ways is quite an ugly human reckoning to have to go through. For many of you are on the human levels having to see, feel, and react to things that you had hoped you would not have to, or had hoped perhaps the transformation on this planet could happen in an easier way. And while we want to remind you that your progress here is influencing and creating the future all of the time, it is also true that you are currently in a timeline that is going to be charged, edgy, difficult, heartbreaking at times. So why we bring this to your attention is not to depress you or make you want to throw in the towel, quite the opposite. We want you to understand the territory that you are in so you are not blindsided by it. While we are here to acknowledge that, yes, you can be in grief or sadness or loss for a period of time about what you are seeing in the world, we also want you to understand that none of that should be a surprise at this moment in history. For this moment in history is a battle between dark and light like you have never seen in your physical lifetime this time around. It is very unique to this period of history, what you are going through. And the outcome is still not entirely decided in terms of the speed at which you go through this transition, the way everything shakes out. But we will tell you to not believe that you simply have to be passive. This is not the time for you to just sit back and wait for it to be all over. You will want to do one of two things or a combination of both. You will want to raise your own frequency and vibration. If you yourself are not able to go out and join in the gatherings to bring about change or the revolutionary energy, that is fine. That is not your place if you are not feeling to be there. But do make sure you are raising your own frequency in your own consciousness through, on a simple level, doing things that can bring you joy, a sense of life, a sense of purpose. So these can be very human activities. But equally, there are many activities that you are aware of, whether it is meditation or breath work or yoga or physical exercise, that shift the vibration of your not only energy field, but your physical body too. So the more you are attending to those, especially while you are aware it is an asteroid field on the planet right now, you will do better. But equally, there are those of you who are here for this change. In fact, you even feel a little enlivened by it. And that is good. Do not be ashamed of that part of you that feels excited about what you are seeing taking place. It doesn't make you dispassionate to the pain or the suffering. It instead means that you are here to be built for this period of time. And you might be the leader for your community, your family, your group, or in fact, hundreds and thousands or millions of people on the planet right now, in helping them to shift their frequency, but also shift their beliefs. For the path that you are going to see presented to you several times in the next few years in different ways is going to be a path of lower consciousness. You are going to be offered this as a people over and over again. And the test is, will you accept it? So it is very important that you understand that the frequencies that you want to see happening in the world are ones that include heart and ones that include wisdom, and ones that are inclusive of all. Any that look divisive, limiting, or devoid of the energies we just spoke of, they are to be, we will say in some cases, suspicious of, in other cases, discerning of, and in other cases, to firmly hold a no in your body, your actions, or your words against these paths that you are being offered. For you as a people are far more powerful than you realize. This is a very important consciousness shift time in history. And as the consciousness raises in the next 2 to 3 years, you are going to see all kinds of things playing out on Earth. Some of them will seem absolutely ludicrous to you. You will not believe some of the games that you see playing out on the planet. But we say, it is not that you have to believe them in a way that makes you align with them, but we do ask you to be prepared for the unexpected on the planet, and then you will not be so surprised about some of the lengths that will be taken to see if a lower agenda can be brought in. The Earth cannot sustain lower agendas anymore, which is why it is such an almighty fight. And it will take the next 2 to 3 years for much of this to fall apart, fall away, detonate, be exposed. But we want to remind you of the importance of guarding your hearts during this time. For your heart truly is your superpower. It is what makes you uniquely human. It is what makes humans unique in the universe. And that power of yours is very important for you to sustain, nurture, and to work together as a community and a collective to foster, because heart intelligence is all you need. You have been asked to rely heavily on your minds. And now there are so many distractions on your planet for your mind, which is a good distraction from your truth. While we are saying there are some good things about the things that you have on the planet now that can distract your mind. For example, the internet is a very important part of what we would call multidimensionality and the development of telepathy on the planet. However, it also has within it all of these places and rabbit holes and traps for you that can get you distracted and sucked into a very mental way of life. So you have to balance all of it, and you have to understand that your heart is the crystal inside your body that is generating everything for you. It is highly important, highly attuned, and it is coming online more than ever before. So this is a very powerful time on Earth. And those of you who are excited about this time on Earth, it is because you have been waiting for this awakening, and you are not as weighed down by the pain of the awakening that others among you might be. Remember, anyone who is processing internal pain is going through their own journey. So while it is wonderful that many of you are so compassionate to those going through such pain and wanting to help them, it is also important to recognize that is their path and their journey, and it is not for you to go in there and pull that out of them or for them. It is instead for you to hold a space of support, perhaps practical, perhaps energetic, to allow them to leave and transmute some of the lower vibrations they are moving through their body, and to join you where you are in the higher frequencies. And by the way, try not to be too linear with this whole higher frequency idea. Many of you beat yourselves up because your frequency today is not as high as it was yesterday. Well, welcome to the weather of planet Earth. Welcome to the weather of the universe. It's never going to stay fixed. So many of you who are listening to this are already in a far higher frequency than you were even 2 or 3 years ago. It doesn't mean you do not still have the fluctuations. But if you truly were to see yourselves 3 years ago and get a glimpse of what your consciousness looked like then and your perception of life and the way that you dealt with reality, you would be surprised how much you have grown. And in fact, this past 18 months on the planet, which have seen many of you locked down, has in fact been a time where many of you have grown inside yourselves exponentially. So do expect the years of 2022 and 2023 to be somewhat revolutionary years on Earth. They are actually needing to be. So do not feel ancestral or historic fear in your body about that. This is the time you came here for. And as souls, you knew full well why you were incarnating. And while we fully empathize with those of you who often say, why am I on this planet and why at this time? Well, we would like to remind you it is very easy to leave. It is very easy for all of you to leave your bodies. You have so many what we call exit points programmed through your life, moments where you could leave this body and return to your energetic state without the human form or the focus of the gravity that the human body brings. So you are here for now for a reason. And instead of feeling suppressed inside your energy or your voice about what you might be perceiving or seeing going on out there, we would like to remind you that more people are already having some of the thoughts that you have been having for a long time, or even the more bold ones are having the conversations. This is a time for all of you as human beings to speak to each other and share what you are experiencing. And that doesn't mean trying to convince the person who wants to fight you that you are right. Instead, it means allowing your voices to be heard where they are welcome. And more importantly than being focused on your own talking, noticing how people respond when you do speak, and noticing, are they giving you permission to go a bit further? And does it give them permission to verbalize something to themselves for perhaps the first time that in turn strengthens their own heart intuition and brings them into the more revolutionary energy of this time that all of you who are ascending through this period of time, and we do not mean leaving your body ascending, we mean ascending your consciousness, will be joining, rather than being in the what we would call suppressed group, who are being held down by the stories of fear that they have chosen to align with for their own personal reasons. No, it is important that you activate each other, and you will find those who want to be activated. And the more of you who activate through this time, the easier the passage you will have through this period. We will leave you with one thought. While we understand that it can be a little depressing or debilitating to look at certain things in the world today and wish that things were not the way they were, we will tell you this. The fact that you are at this point in human history in 2021 and you did not get here sooner in, say, 2014 or 2015, which at one point on the timeline was possible, is far better for your society, for your earth, and for your possibility to transform. So we would like to remind you that the pace so far has been somewhat slowed down so that more of you can jump on board to be a part of the transformation, rather than simply reacting to what you are seeing going on around you and feeling powerless within it. The greatest lie humanity has been told is that you are not powerful beings. The greatest truth humanity is currently learning and waking up to is that you are powerful beings, and far more than you have been told you were. Good. In peace and in love to all.
Thank you, Lee. That was brilliant. Thank you. That really inspired people. It was a great way to finish. Just one thing you said there that really resonated was the excitement. Some days I actually feel guilty because I'm so excited about what's going on the planet. I'm like, is this what we were waiting for, you know? So, because it's really happening, like you can see it right now, you know?
I have a great friend who's brilliant spiritually, and she was just saying to me the other day that embracing paradox is so important right now. You know, that life is a paradox, and you know, I think of that in terms of, you hear a piece of news or you hear about something a friend is going through, and you know, you resonate with it and you feel it, but then equally an hour later, can you allow yourself to be in a different place? Can you allow yourself to be in peace or generating joy for somebody? And that really is, I think, the challenge of this time. The speed at which we're being offered all these different vibrations is unlike anything before. So your ninja word holds true. And one thing I will just share, I did a live event for alternatives in London in 2017. And something came out during the Z's channel that really stayed with me, and I've certainly experienced it as true. They said 2017 to 2024 are going to be, they didn't say tough years, but they weren't sugarcoating it. They basically said, this is going to be a very intense period for your people. But they said, even though there will be things that might hurt your heart to see or feel, they said, for those of you who are light workers, who identify as being here for this transformation, they said it's going to be some of the most golden years of your life because of the level of purpose you will feel and because of some of the things you will get to experience. And I'm with you, Paul. I mean, that has certainly been true for me. Doesn't take away the tough stuff, but there's certainly an elevated level that I think we are all getting to play in and be in now that's very different. So, yeah.
I think as well earlier on what you said about when you do your practices and you go out into the world, you are affecting the energy of the world. So for everybody out there who feels like, you know, sometimes I should be doing something, you're doing enough by raising consciousness as much as you can in your own life and in the lives around you. So keep doing that kind of work. I had a check-in with myself recently because I'm not really a protester, but I felt drawn to kind of do a bit of protesting. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to keep contributing to raising the consciousness. I'm going to go right to the mainframe. I heard somebody once say we're changing the whole software and focus on that aspect of it rather than the minutia of the division, you know, which we talked about earlier. So thanks, Lee, tonight for such empowering messages for everybody. It was brilliant. We had some people watching on Facebook, so we'll get this video out as much as we can. Keep raising the consciousness. Thanks to all you beautiful people for being here. Some faces I know from back in the day. I see Neve, I see Gillian, Sabine, Maura Ross, some great people there. So thank you for tuning in. We will be back soon with some more events in September, loads of Positive Nights gigs, and I'll have you as well. We're going to be doing some live events. We're going to be doing inside, outside, upside, downside, whatever we can do. We'll figure it out and we'll gather again, because I think gathering in a live event with other people in community is really, really important right now. So gather and send out as much love as you can. I'm going to say goodbye to everybody who tuned in tonight. I'm going to ask Lee just to hang on for 2 or 3 minutes to say goodbye to him personally. But thank you all, and feel free to leave there when you're ready to go. Wave away there to Lee, send him a bit of love.
Thanks,
some
everyone.
Great comments
Thank
coming
you
in, Lee.
Paul, for organizing all of this.
Beautiful. It was beautiful. Thanks, folks. Goodbye. See you next time. Thank you.